Francesco Scalice, also known as Frank Scalice and Don Ciccio, was an old-time original born in Palermo, Sicily back on September 23, 1893. His brothers Giuseppe, Giacomo, Giovanni, and Salvatore would join Frank in the rackets to one degree or another, with at least 3 of them becoming formally inducted mafiosi. Upon immigrating to this country, the Scalice family settled in the Bronx, which would become their base of underworld operations. Frank soon married, and he and his wife would raise 6 daughters and a stepson at their Crotona Bronx residence. They later relocated to a 3-bedroom home on City Island. In the early years, he listed his employment as the owner of a butcher shop. This was a business that many other Mangano Anastasia members and blood relatives were involved in. The Castellano, Scarpola, and Massato families were all deeply enmeshed in this trade. By at least the late 1940s, he officially listed his employment as a stockholder and the vice president of the Mario and DiBono Plastering Company in the Corona section of Queens, a major building contractor. As a side note, this company was started by an old mafioso who also hailed from Palermo and was a soldier in the family. His son was Louis DiBono, who later became a soldier himself until John Gotti ordered his execution in the garage of the World Trade Center, a murder that helped earn Gotti a life sentence. In time, Scalice would become one of the most important and powerful members of the Mafia in New York. In fact, he would rise to become the interim boss over his own borgata until a power play saw him accede the boss position to Vincent Mangano and later to the Calabrian Albert Anastasia. Scalice would thereafter still exert power for many years as the underboss of the family. Before I continue, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave us a comment after you're done watching the video. Frank was a close associate of the murdered Salvatore D'Aquila and his allies, who were said to have headed the family previous to Scalice. Based in the Bronx like Scalice, the 2 men were thought to have been close. He was also close to the Gambino brothers Carlo and Paolo, who were also important mafiosi. Additional close associates were soldiers Frank Luciano, Matthew Cuomo, Morris Barra, Giacomo Scarpola, Giovanni Mogeri, Salvatore Caniba, and Sebastiano Belanca. Another little-known sleeper but very important member was Antonino Nino Conte of Corona, Queens. Conte was the father of future Gambino capo Pasquale Conte and another owner of a string of meat markets as well. Nino Conte was also suspected of being a low-key capo who was active in extensive alien and heroin smuggling, 2 trades that he taught to his son. In future years, Patsy Conte would be exposed as an international drug smuggler and a multimillionaire. For years, he hid behind the facade as a food chain executive of Key Food Supermarkets, a popular chain of large supermarkets that stretched across the city. But it all started with his dad Nino back in Corona. The Scalice brothers primarily operated from the Crescent Avenue section of the Bronx, Arthur Avenue, and other surrounding areas. They were heavily engaged in liquor bootlegging, money counterfeiting, the Italian numbers lottery, shakedowns, and extortion rackets. Frank became a major force within New York's construction industry and was suspected of controlling several labor union locals that were used as tools to extort contractors. Scalice's company was also central to subcontract work in the building of several major construction projects, such as those at Idlewild and LaGuardia airports and various Manhattan skyscrapers. Additionally, Frank was highly suspected of heading an extensive heroin importation and wholesale distribution network in partnership with other top hoodlums such as Lucky Luciano and Carlo Gambino. In fact, the FBI, or Federal Bureau of Narcotics, had recorded his travel back and forth to Italy and Sicily numerous times where he was in steady contact with other mafiosi suspected of drug trafficking. Don Cheech was even photographed with Luciano and their wives in Italy, where the Scalices were there on vacation. Many young Anastasia Scalice and Luciano Genovese members were tied to this particular drug network. Despite being knee-deep in the rackets as a leader for many decades and having survived the Castelmarese War of the early 1930s, Frank had a benign police record. Identified by NYCPD number E5826, it only showed entries for a 1920 burglary charge and a 1954 vagrancy arrest. But on June 17, 1957, at the age of 63, Scalice abruptly came to the end of his long career. In a scene reminiscent of the Godfather movie, 2 gunmen cornered him inside an Arthur Avenue fruit and vegetable market in his old Bronx neighborhood and pumped him full of bullets until he collapsed to the sawdust floor of the produce store. He was hit with 4 shots that penetrated his cheek, neck, and shoulder. Don Cheech was dead as he hit the floor. He was said to have been picking peaches at the time and didn't even notice his assailants approaching. Several weeks later, Don Cheech's brother Giuseppe or Joe Scalice disappeared and was reported as missing. Word on the street was that he had taken his brother's murder very badly and had hot-headedly sworn revenge against the killers. Upon word getting back to Albert Anastasia, he then ordered Joe's murder as well. Side note, motives for Scalice's killing have run the gamut from him commercializing Cosa Nostra by selling membership buttons for up to $50,000 each to aspiring recruits, to his narcotics trafficking to an internal power play. But regardless of the genesis, both he and his brother met their maker. At least one other brother, Giacomo or Jack, retired back to his native Sicily where he was said to have owned and operated a gas station. The location was said to have been along a key road leading in and out of Palermo, so it was a suspected sound moneymaker. Giacomo was also suspected of having reaffiliated with his old Sicilian brethren and operating local rackets. Don Cheech Scalice had the name and played the Mafia game as well as anybody for upwards of 40 years. But his time had come, as it usually does for mafiosi who operate at that level. His name is forever etched in underworld infamy along with his contemporaries of this bloody era, Mangano, Anastasia, Reina, Maranzano, Masseria, and Catania, among many others. You can learn more Mafia history right here in our Mob Fireside Chat library and also by visiting our website at www.thenewyorkmafia.com, where you can indulge in hundreds of stories about mobsters and mafia history, as well as leadership charts, mugshots, and more. But before you go, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave us a comment. Thank you for watching. Until next time.